Hello everyone, and you're welcome to today's video. I'm Rebecca and I use homeopathy and QTT personal development methods, coaching and mentoring to help you and your family to be as healthy and as happy as you can be and to stay that way. And today's video is part of my commitment or my passion, if you like, to helping as many people as I can to use homeopathic remedies for treating their own and their families' minor illnesses. And as part of that, I do these live videos. Once a month, we go into some depth into the more common remedies that are used on an acute basis, remedies that are in home prescribing kits like this one. And these are the kits that I base my home prescribing learning courses around. So there's an online course that I offer on my website, and there's also the possibility, if you do live close to me, to take part in a live course. And you can find out more details about those courses if you pop to the website, and the address is in the post with this video. So, Anne-Marie, good morning. You're very welcome. I'll just give you a little wave there. And for any of you that are watching, always really, really helpful to know that you can hear me. So if you want to give me a little thumbs up or just a comment or a heart, anything you like, really, just to let me know that you are able to hear me. That would be great. Okay, so today's remedy is lovely, lovely remedy, possibly the most well-known remedy in the homeopathic toolkit. And that is thanks very much for the thumbs up. And that is the remedy Arnica. And I'm sure most of you have probably heard of Arnica, even if you haven't actually used it. But if you have used it, it'd be great to hear whether you have, whether you've used it topically, or whether you've actually used it orally. Because I think an awful lot of people I come across will have used it topically, but don't necessarily know that you can actually take it in an oral form, in a pill. And actually, if you do take it orally, it's much more effective, works faster, works deeper, and is much more effective than putting on a topical cream or gel, although they have their place too. So let me know in the comments below, or live now if you wish to, whether you've used Arnica before. So yeah, very well known, mostly for what it is mostly used for, which is for mechanical injuries. So I'm talking about bumps, falls, knocks, anything where your tissue has been damaged in some way. It's just brilliant, especially if you feel bruised, a bit battered, bit like you've been kind of beaten up. Even if you haven't been, but sometimes we can feel like that after we've had some kind of injury. So it's great for damage to the tissue on the outside of us. So obviously our skin and our top layers of skin, but also for internal trauma to the tissue. So any kind of tearing or bumps or mechanical injuries internally. And actually it is used an awful lot, even by hospitals, especially in the private sector actually, as a post-operative recovery aid. So any kind of surgery, including childbirth, anything like that. And that's because your body doesn't really know the difference between something that ultimately is going to be of benefit to you and something that has happened, by accident. That the effect on your tissue is the same, basically, which is that tissues are damaged and traumatised. And that's the most well-known use for arnica. But there are actually lots of other uses, and it's those uses that I wanted to go into a bit more detail about today. So, first of all, actually I should tell you why I picked arnica, and that is because last week I think it was, I was doing a charity walk for International Women's Day in the National Park here. And there were a lot of dogs doing the walk as well, and I tripped over one. And I fell down hard on my right side. And I was with a lot of people I didn't really know very well. And my immediate reaction was kind of dual. One was I thought, okay, that's really quite a hard fall, and that doesn't feel great. But the overriding one was, okay, get up, just make out you're fine, and you'll carry on, and you'll just keep going. And that is a kind of classic arnica response to what is, obviously not a good state. So you'll often find that people who have had quite bad accidents will behave as if, no, I'm fine, nothing's wrong, leave me alone. And that when you see that and you go, yeah, there is actually obviously something wrong here. There's no way you could have come out of that unscathed. And somebody's going, no, I'm fine, leave me alone, don't touch me. That is the classic arnica state. So whenever you see that, get your arnica bottle out and try and make them take some, because it's a state of shock, really. And that's what arnica is also really, really helpful at rebalancing, is not only the mechanical, physical injury, but the emotional state that goes with that often, which is a state of shock and denial. And it is actually a very dangerous state, particularly if somebody's had a serious accident, because obviously they could have a concussion of some nature, and if they're going to ignore it and carry on, they won't necessarily have it detected or addressed, and they could go into a state of collapse later on. So even if you're not sure about what's going to happen, putting arnica into your system or into the person's system will help to prevent that from happening, because it will start the body repair process straight away. So that's just something to bear in mind. So yeah, after my fall, I did actually, because I always carry my kit in my car. So as soon as I got back to the car, I started taking the arnica, and I actually took it for the next 24 hours, and touch wood, I'm fine now. Yeah, and it will encourage bruising to come out. So actually the bruising that I sustained on my arm in particular, actually, because I kind of fell on my arm, came out really, really quickly, and it went through all those lovely colours that bruises go through. So that's what you find with homeopathic remedies, is everything is kind of speeded up a bit. So, okay, so what is arnica? Well, it's a beautiful flower, kind of orangey yellow flower, that grows in mountainous areas, in high altitudes, particularly in the Alps, in alpine areas. And it thrives on soil that is torn and full of debris, broken trees, things like that. So it actually, when you get that kind of soil, there's a lot of insect life as well. So it has to be pretty hardy above ground, but also pretty hardy underneath in its root system as well. And it seems to have developed survival properties that enable it to withstand that kind of injury and damage. And that's obviously what we're harnessing in the medicinal properties of this plant. It was, the story goes, first discovered by people living in those areas who observed the animals that were up there, goats, sheep, animals like that, that did sustain injuries quite often because that's just the nature of the terrain, and they would automatically go to the Arnica plants and nibble them. And it's been long used by climbers and by mountaineers for those kind of injuries. Also, though, for helping things like altitude sickness and exhaustion. And that's the kind of the area that I'm interested in today, actually. It is a really useful remedy for when we have pushed ourselves too hard, when we've, particularly from physical work or just keeping going too long. Work is a very important value for people needing Arnica, and because it's an important value, they're not very good at giving in or hearing when they've had enough. So they'll keep going too long. So, and we don't have to be like that all the time, but some of us can go into that state if we've got a task to complete. So, for example, if you're gardening and you've got a new bed to prepare, new flower bed to prepare, and you're digging, and you reach a stage where you know, I really need a break here, but you want to get the task done, so you push yourself through it. And then you can find that you're pretty achy and exhausted afterwards. And so that is an Arnica state as well, that state of exhaustion, particularly from physical work and pushing yourself a bit too hard. Excuse me. Other mental emotionals would be that, work is very important. I'm just checking my notes here. They very much are people who need to feel that they are indispensable and useful and hardworking, and they get things done. And that often means, as I've said, that they will push themselves a bit too hard. Endurance is something that they value, and it can be a positive if they're in a situation where they need to get something done, but it can also be a negative, like most things, really. If you think about where the plant grows and what its properties are, it's consistent with the doctrine of signatures, which I don't know if many of you are familiar with, but it's a belief system with plant medicine that goes with observing the properties of a plant in terms of how it grows, how it looks, its appearance, and where it grows, things like that. All clues as to what the medicinal properties of a plant are. And that kind of need to push yourself is actually very important if you're climbing or hill walking or up in high altitudes where it's not really going to help you to stop and remain still for very long. It's important that you do keep going and that you do reach your goal, or that you're able to go, push yourself to get to lower altitudes or get off that ledge, or, whatever it is. But the flip side is obviously that you can sustain a lot of exhaustion. So that's a kind of theme for Arnica people, if you like. They don't give in very easily. They won't surrender. And they're not very good at changing their habits either. And they can be quite intolerant of people who don't have the same values, people who do stop and rest and do mind themselves a bit. So they can be a bit critical of that. That kind of instinctive don't touch me, that I talked about if you've had an accident, that's a protective instinct because obviously if you have hurt yourself, the last thing you want is for somebody to poking or prodding you. So that's a defence strategy, but it's something that a lot of Arnica people can get stuck in that they don't really want people close to them, or especially touching them physically. They like to be seen as being strong and pushing fear and anxiety away, basically. They're not going to give in to it. But often that can come out during their sleep. So you might find that with kids, for example, if they've had some kind of fall or accident, if you then find that they start to have nightmares afterwards or bad dreams, then think of Arnica. And it's never too late to give Arnica. Don't think because your child had an accident last week and you only just thought, oh, I think they might be having some ill effects from it, too late to give Arnica. Not at all. I've had cases where all sorts of pathology has come originally from a very bad fall or a shock, and it's years later, and if we give Arnica in the right way, it will address that trauma, and it rebalances and puts everything right again. So never too late. They, as well as the kind of I'm fine, nothing's wrong, they can also, a bit later, they can almost go the other way. So they can actually sometimes go into a really, really hypersensitive state, which is kind of like an exaggeration of the keep away from me, don't touch me. It's everything hurts, everything, feels that they're sensitive to it. So that's something you might see as well. It can often manifest when there's a prolonged state of anxiety or hard work. So in the current climate, if people are in a high anxiety state for a lot of the time, some people might respond in a way that is very consistent with Arnica, which may well be feelings of total exhaustion, overwhelm, feeling like they're being attacked in a way, not necessarily physically, but emotionally, and they just want to retire from everything and just curl up and go to sleep. So Arnica can be handy if you're feeling like that. It's a very adrenal remedy, actually. And when you think about it, when we are pushing ourselves like that, especially if we're in a state of anxiety or perhaps thinking that there's danger constantly, that's a high adrenaline state. It's not meant to be prolonged. It's meant to be an emergency measure. And if we are in that for a long length of time, then our adrenal glands can become compromised, and you can find that you're permanently in that. Thanks for the thumbs up. That you're permanently in that state, and that's not healthy. So even if you are starting to feel a little bit exhausted with everything that's going on around you, then an Arnica or two might well help you rebalance and get out of that. The other thing is with the mental emotional state is they're very black and white. So that's a kind of stripping down of everything again. If you're in a worried, continuously worried, anxious state, you haven't got time to look at the grey parts of life. It's like, is it this or isn't it this? You know, just tell me, black or white. And that's very Arnica, that kind of state. So often it's useful to think about what triggers somebody to go into an Arnica state. Now, we've talked about, obviously, any mechanical injury can trigger an Arnica state, and I would just give it as a matter of course if somebody's had a fall or a bump or a, you know, especially head injuries, things like that. It's possibly, well, I think it is actually the remedy in the kit that I most end up refilling. So my clients who have these kits and who come to me for refills, especially mums, you get through it like nobody's business, especially if you've got kids, obviously, because they're always falling over and injuring themselves and, you know, needing a little bit of TLC. So Arnica can mop that up very, very quickly. So the other trigger for going into an Arnica state, would be any kind of shock. So that can be obviously physical shock, as we've just said, or it can be an emotional shock. So it could be a sudden death, you know, if there's grief. It can be having been in a prolonged grief state and getting in a state of exhaustion from it. It can be anything where there has been a big trauma. If somebody has been attacked, or there's a fear of being attacked, or what else? Robbery, you know, anything where somebody has felt under threat, then that can push you into an Arnica state. As I said earlier, overworking, any kind of overworking, prolonged overworking state, particularly mechanical work, and sports. So if a lot of time in sports, the nature of it is that people who are playing sports are quite often tipping themselves over their natural boundaries. They are having to push themselves a little bit further than they're physically able for in a sustained way. The nature of the beast, isn't it? But it can have a price tag attached to it. So if you're somebody who plays a lot of sport, for two reasons. If they're very competitive, say, and you're kind of aware that they are always pushing themselves a bit too hard, then Arnica is a good thing to be giving as a support. But also just for all those knocks and bumps and, you know, injuries that you sustain when you're playing a physical sport. So very handy for that. Anybody who is in a prolonged state of adrenal anxiety, so that kind of fight, flight or freeze state, Arnica can be very useful in that situation. A feeling of being overwhelmed, you know, like you're under threat all the time, that can be very, very handy. Also, big affinity for the blood, the circulation system, which is why it's really, really handy for flying if you're going anywhere on a plane. For two reasons. Again, because some people can get quite anxious about the whole aspect of flying or travelling, but also because you are under pressure. You know, if you're flying in a plane, it's a high pressure environment. Most of you will notice from your plastic water bottle when we're flying that by the end of the flight, it's often sucked itself in. It's compressed. Well, that's what it's doing to your insides as well. So dropping some Arnica into your water bottle and sipping away at it while you're flying will help to mitigate that. Also, because it's supporting the blood to circulate, and to oxygenate all your organs, then it can help to prevent things like deep vein thrombosis again. So if you're a little bit prone to any kind of clotting or thrombosis type stuff, and you're having to go on a plane, or in any situation where you're concerned about it, sitting down too long maybe, if you're going on very long car journeys and you're in a sitting position, again, Arnica can be used to great success to help balance things and keep things flowing, which is what you want. So, physical effects of Arnica, obviously all the mechanical injuries that we've spoken about. Used a lot for surgeries and for childbirth. Very many of my clients come to me asking for things like Arnica when they're pregnant and they're thinking about the actual birth itself. And then because they're so pleased with the results, they continue treatment with me. So Arnica is often used both post-operatively and sometimes, as a kind of sharpening up for the body before surgery. I personally wouldn't recommend taking it for very long before a surgery, just the day of, possibly the day before. That's all you need. You don't need to take it for long periods before that. I would concentrate more on afterwards, personally. And obviously, much better to consult your homeopath for specific advice, because it will depend on the nature of the surgery that you're having as to how you use it and when you use it. I find it very helpful if somebody has a very prolonged cough for whatever reason, because when you're coughing, especially if it's a deep chesty cough, a lot of the tissue around this area can get traumatized, it gets damaged, it feels bruised, and there can often be pain and discomfort in the chest area with somebody with some kind of lung problem or respiratory problem, not necessarily from the actual breathing tubes, more because of that movement that the cough is doing constantly, putting that whole area under pressure, and you can get damage to the ligaments and the muscles and all the tissues around there. So it can be useful as a backup for whatever cough remedy is indicated at the time as well. Because it has an affinity to the blood, it can be very useful if there's a tendency to bruising, very easy bruising, or nosebleeds, anything like that, especially if it's actually something that's manifested after a mechanical injury of some sort, or surgery, or some kind of shock. We've talked about adrenal fatigue, exhaustion, that feeling of being a bit battered, and sometimes you can just get that after a normal day at work. It doesn't matter what work you do. Sometimes we get home and we just think, God, I just feel absolutely exhausted, like, battered, almost like someone's been beating you up, basically. You haven't had any kind of mechanical injury, but that's what you feel like. So if you do feel like that, a couple of doses of Arnica can sort you out. It also helps when there is sepsis. So it can help with things like acne and septic, kind of boil type skin eruptions. So especially if they feel bruised and painful. So it can be helpful for that. Any kind of heart disease, it can help the the circulation to flow and do whatever it needs to be doing. It's a balancer. So the way that homeopathic remedies work is that they encourage your body to do whatever it needs to do to work towards health. So if your blood pressure is too high, it will balance it and lower it. If it's too low, it may raise it a little bit, balance it out. It'll help your body do whatever is necessary, basically. So it's very useful instead of something like aspirin. If anybody is on aspirin or warfarin or any of those kind of blood thinning drugs, you can often use Arnica instead, which will have obviously no side effects. But again, I wouldn't do that without consulting your homeopath, because it will be part of a whole treatment. They can have a lot of headaches with dizziness, and also kind of a sensation of a rush of blood to the head. That's a very Arnica symptom. So that can come on sometimes, if you have knocked your head in some way, or if you've just been working too hard. So look out for those symptoms. Any changes to your metabolism or the way that your body works after an injury. So sometimes people can get things like bowel changes, either way, too loose, too hard. Arnica will sort it out if it's come originally from an injury, because it's all part of your body just going into an emergency shock type response. And that means anything in your body can change. It can have, if you have got heart stuff or circulatory stuff going on, has a kind of weird symptom, which a lot of remedies have, is there's like a sensation of coldness in your heart. That's an Arnica symptom. It can be really, really helpful during pregnancy. So useful for the actual birth itself, but also during pregnancy, it can help with a lot of different types of morning sickness and actual vomiting as well, particularly from if you have a sensation that it's coming from when the baby moves around. Again, that's about internal trauma is maybe too strong a word, but your internal tissues are being stretched a bit, torn a bit, maybe pushed a bit beyond their limits. So often when the baby moves around, that is what it feels like, and it can induce things like nausea and vomiting. So that's why Arnica is handy in that situation. It can also be useful for certain food aversions. So if you're pregnant and you're going off foods, or actually craving them, things like cravings for brandy or whiskey, or sour things, pickles, things like that, vinegary things. Often Arnica can help with that. What else? Yeah, broken sleep generally, and broken sleep during pregnancy can be really handy, because again, you're going into that kind of exhausted state where you're going to have to push yourself a little bit harder, a bit beyond your, what you should be doing. Back pain can have during pregnancy or any other time, and kind of lower back pain where you are having difficulty peeing. Yeah, what else? Yeah, stomach stuff, cramps, bloating, if your belly's quite distended, can have a lot of wind, and the wind is pretty foul, pretty smelly. Arnica can help that, and there can be quite a lot of abdominal pain with that kind of wind, trapped wind, or just the presence of wind. Again, it's when you think about there being wind in your intestines, it's pushing them out and forcing them to go beyond what they're meant to be at, if that makes sense. Going back to that cough, great support remedy for things like whooping cough, where you've got that prolonged coughing, very hard coughing. And often if you have got a child who's going to respond to Arnica, if they're doing that kind of hard whooping cough, they will cry every time before they cough. So cry, then cough. The coughs can be quite violent. You can get, things like nosebleeds with the coughing. Arnica can be very helpful for that. And it's also very useful for some types of flus and colds where there's shivering and the head feels hot, but the body feels cool. And that's true of fevers as well. If you get that symptom where the head is hot, but the body's cool, and you're feeling exhausted and a bit battered and all of those things, then think of Arnica. And that includes things like, tonsillitis, if there's any dizziness with it as well. So in the current climate, that might well be handy. What you're looking for as well is the modalities of the remedy. So we're always looking for the things that our patients feel better for and the things that they feel worse for. So with Arnica, there aren't a whole heap of them, so they're quite easy to spot, really. We've already talked about things like, don't touch me. So in any of those complaints, your client, your patient is going to probably say, don't touch me, stay away. It's generally worse at night. So you'll get any of those symptoms kind of revving up at night time. It's generally worse for getting overheated. So they don't like to be too hot. And it's worse for things that are going to stimulate the adrenals because it's a high adrenal remedy. So things like wine and coffee will not agree. So those are pretty much the main modalities, as we call them. I think that's pretty much it. I've been talking a lot. I'm very aware that you've all been very quiet. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope that it's illuminating, expanding your awareness of Arnica a bit. Do let me know if you've had any other experiences, any situations where you found Arnica has really, really helped you. That'd be great to hear, because it's always good for people who haven't tried things like Arnica before to hear what other people have experienced. So even if you're watching the replay, do pop into the comments below any experiences that you've had with it. I will just say that, just to bear in mind, being very pedantic about this, because I'm talking about homeopathy rather than herbalism, if you're using creams and gels that have Arnica in them, and I really encourage you to because they're fabulous, it's not strictly homeopathic, it's more herbal, because often they are used with a herbal, a plant tincture that's put into the cream or the gel. When you're using it homeopathically, you're usually taking it orally, so the little tiny sugar pills that are in this kit, and it tends to work at a much deeper level. You can of course do both, because if you think about that plant, herbally you're addressing the situation from outside, and orally you're addressing it from inside, and they'll meet, and you'll have a beautiful healing effect. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say on Arnica. Do think of it in a wider context than just physical injury, although obviously that is the majority of the case what you're going to be using it for. If you've got any questions, do pop them in to the comment thread or message me. That's fine. If you would like to know more about working with me, either one-to-one or on those courses, those learning courses that I mentioned, then do pop onto my website or message me. Pop onto the website and you can register for a free call with me and we can have a chat about how I can help you. Yeah, or if you already, maybe you've already done a course with somebody else, or you're dithering about getting one of these kits, I would really recommend you do it, especially as they're all on kind of housebound at the moment. Really helpful to have your own toolkit in the house available to you that you can use and that you can access if you start to feel any symptoms. And I'm not just talking about, coldy, flu-y symptoms. I'm talking about anything. Often, when we stop working and leading our kind of slightly habitual lives, that's when we realise that we're actually a little bit running on empty and things like acute illnesses can come up. So isn't it great that we can have tools at our disposal, like these kits, or individual remedies that we can use without having to even leave the house or go anywhere? And yeah, again, I've been popping up during this week. Just a quick reminder that you don't have to leave your house to come and work with me. You can book online consultations. If you're already a client of mine, we can just have a chat on the phone. We can talk on the phone anyway. If you're needing help with any symptoms, you can book all of those from my website, or just give me a call, and I'll put all those links in with the post with this video. So keep safe, keep well, and keep using those remedies. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you so much for watching, and I wish you all the best. And, hello, Jackie. Just give you a quick wave. Yeah, that's it. Okay, bye.